Joy Behar sat in her dressing room, staring at the printed email in her hands. The makeup artist worked around her, applying foundation and powder, but Joy's mind was somewhere else entirely. She'd been hosting The View for years, and she knew exactly what made good television. This email could be the moment that everyone would be talking about for weeks. The story had started 3 days earlier when one of her researchers, Tommy, burst into her office with excitement written all over his face. He was young, maybe 25, with that eager energy that reminded Joy of herself when she first started in television. "You're not going to believe what I found," he said, waving a folder in the air. Tommy had been digging through public records and leaked documents trying to find something juicy for the upcoming interview with Kash Patel. Patel was making the rounds, promoting his new book about government corruption and the deep state. He'd been on every major network talking about transparency and honesty in government, but Tommy thought he'd found proof that Patel wasn't as clean as he pretended to be. "Look at this," Tommy said, spreading papers across Joy's desk. "This email shows he was involved in some shady stuff back when he worked for the government. He's been lying about his role in everything." Joy picked up the email and read it carefully. On the surface, it looked damning. There were references to classified operations, mentions of covering things up, and language that suggested Patel knew more than he was letting on. This was exactly the kind of ammunition Joy loved to use during interviews. She'd built her reputation on these moments. Politicians and government officials would come on the show thinking they'd get an easy interview, maybe some softball questions about their latest book or project. But Joy always did her homework. She'd wait for the right moment, then pull out the documents or the quotes that would make them squirm. It was good television, and it was good journalism. The next 2 days were spent preparing. Joy's team worked around the clock, fact-checking the email, trying to verify its authenticity, and planning how to use it during the interview. They practiced different approaches. Should she bring it up early or wait until the end? Should she read parts of it or just reference it? These decisions mattered because once you played your hand on live television, there was no taking it back. Joy remembered some of her biggest moments over the years. There was the time she caught a senator in a lie about his voting record. The footage went viral and the senator's poll numbers dropped overnight. Or when she exposed a government official's connection to a lobbying scandal. That interview had led to a congressional investigation. But this felt different. This felt bigger. Kash Patel had been making waves with his book, claiming he was some kind of whistleblower, someone who'd stood up to corruption in the intelligence community. If Joy could prove he was just as corrupt as everyone else, it would be a major story. The morning of the interview, Joy arrived at the studio early. She liked to get there before anyone else, to walk around the set, to feel the space. The studio was her domain. She knew every camera angle, every lighting setup, every spot where she could deliver a line for maximum impact. Her co-hosts started arriving around 7. They gathered in the green room for their usual pre-show meeting. Joy showed them the email, explained what she'd found, and walked them through her plan. They were excited. Everyone could sense this was going to be one of those episodes that people would remember. "Are you sure about this?" asked one of her co-hosts, Whoopi. She was always the cautious one, the voice of reason who made sure they didn't go too far. "This seems pretty serious. What if he has an explanation?" Joy waved off the concern. "That's exactly why we're doing this on live television. He won't have time to come up with some prepared response. We'll get his real reaction, his honest answer. That's when the truth comes out." The production team was buzzing with energy. Word had gotten around that Joy had something big planned for the Patel interview. The camera operators were extra focused, the sound engineers double-checked their equipment, and the director made sure they had tight shots ready for the moment of confrontation. At 8:30, Kash Patel arrived at the studio. Joy watched from the green room as he went through the usual pre-interview routine. Hair and makeup, a quick sound check, some small talk with the producers. He seemed relaxed, confident. He probably thought this was going to be another friendly interview where he could promote his book and talk about his patriotic service to the country. Joy felt a familiar rush of adrenaline. This was what she lived for. The moment when someone who thought they were safe, someone who thought they could control the narrative, suddenly realized they were in trouble. It was like being a detective and a prosecutor at the same time. She looked at the email one more time. The language was a bit confusing in places, and some of the names were redacted, but the main points seemed clear enough. Patel had been involved in covering up some kind of operation. He'd lied about his role. He'd participated in the exact kind of corruption he now claimed to oppose. The stage manager called for places. Joy walked onto the set, shook hands with Patel, and took her position at the table. The studio audience was larger than usual. Word had gotten out that something big might happen, and people wanted to be there to see it. As the show's theme music played and the cameras went live, Joy felt completely in control. She had the smoking gun. She had the evidence that would expose Kash Patel as a fraud. In a few minutes, she'd make television history. But as she looked across the table at Patel, who was smiling and chatting easily with her co-hosts, she had no idea that she was about to make history in a completely different way than she'd planned. The email in her folder, the one she'd spent days studying and preparing to use, was about to turn her moment of triumph into a disaster that would change everything. The show started exactly like any other Tuesday morning. Joy walked onto the set with her usual confidence, coffee mug in hand, ready to take on the world. The audience applauded as the cameras went live, and the familiar energy of The View filled the studio. Everything felt normal, comfortable, routine. "Good morning, everyone," Joy said with her trademark smile. "We're here with Kash Patel, author of the new book, Government Gangsters. Thanks for being with us, Kash." Patel nodded and smiled back. He looked relaxed, maybe even a little too comfortable for Joy's liking. He was wearing a dark suit and red tie, the uniform of every government official who'd ever sat in that chair. His media training was obvious in the way he sat up straight and made eye contact with each host as they introduced him. For the first 15 minutes, everything went according to the usual script. Joy's co-hosts asked the softball questions that every guest expected. "Tell us about your book. What inspired you to write it? What do you want people to know about government corruption?" Patel gave the answers he'd probably given on 20 other shows that month. He talked about his time in the intelligence community, how he'd seen corruption from the inside, how he'd decided to speak out because someone had to tell the truth. His voice had that practiced tone of someone who'd told the same story over and over again. Joy watched him carefully, waiting for her moment. The studio audience was paying attention but not hanging on every word. This was the kind of interview they'd seen before. A former government guy promoting his book, talking about the swamp in Washington, promising to reveal secrets that everyone already suspected. Nothing too exciting yet, but Joy could feel the energy building inside her. She had the folder sitting right there on the table, just out of camera view. Inside that folder was the email that would change everything. She kept glancing at it, checking to make sure it was still there, making sure the pages were in the right order. Her co-hosts were doing their job perfectly. They were keeping Patel talking, keeping him comfortable, setting him up for what was coming next. Joy had trained them well over the years. Everyone knew their role in these moments. Whoopi was asking about the intelligence community's response to his book. "Have any of your former colleagues reached out to you? Are they supporting what you're doing?" Patel leaned forward slightly. "You know, Whoopi, it's been interesting. Some people have been very supportive privately, but they're afraid to speak out publicly. The system punishes whistleblowers even when we're telling the truth about corruption." Joy felt her pulse quicken. This was perfect. He was setting himself up as the honest whistleblower, the guy who had the courage to tell the truth when nobody else would. In a few minutes, she was going to destroy that entire image. The commercial break came at exactly the right time. As soon as the cameras stopped rolling, Joy reached for her folder. She could see Patel chatting casually with the makeup artist, who came over to touch up his powder. He had no idea what was coming. 2 minutes, called the stage manager. Joy opened the folder and looked at the email one more time. She'd read it so many times over the past 3 days that she practically had it memorized, but she wanted to make sure she got the details right when she read it on air. This wasn't the kind of thing you could mess up. The email was dated about 2 years ago when Patel was still working in government. It was addressed to several people with most of the names blacked out for security reasons, but Patel's name was clear, and so was his role in what looked like a cover-up operation. 30 seconds, the stage manager announced. Joy closed the folder and looked across the table at Patel. He was checking his phone, probably reading messages from his publicist or his publisher. He looked so calm, so sure of himself. That was about to change. The theme music started playing and the cameras went live again. Joy put on her professional smile and looked directly into camera 2. "We're back with Kash Patel," she said. "Kash, you've spent a lot of time talking about corruption in government, about how important it is to be transparent and honest with the American people. That's right, Joy. Transparency is everything. If we can't trust our government to tell us the truth, then democracy doesn't work." Joy nodded, her heart beating faster. "That's interesting, because I have something here that I think our viewers would be very interested in seeing." She reached for the folder and she could see Patel's expression change slightly. Nothing dramatic, just a small shift in his eyes, like he was trying to figure out what was happening. "This is an email," Joy continued, pulling the papers from the folder. "That was sent 2 years ago when you were still working in the intelligence community." The studio got very quiet. The audience sensed that something big was about to happen. Joy's co-hosts leaned forward slightly, ready to follow her lead. The camera operators zoomed in for tighter shots. Patel sat up straighter in his chair. "Joy, I'm not sure what you think you have there, but let me read this to our viewers," Joy interrupted, holding up the first page of the email. "This is your name right here at the top, correct?" She turned the paper so the camera could see it, and Patel squinted to read what she was showing him. His face went from confused to concerned in about 2 seconds. "Joy, where did you get that? That looks like it could be classified material." But Joy was already reading. This was her moment, the moment she'd been building toward for 3 days, the moment that would show millions of viewers that Kash Patel wasn't the honest whistleblower he claimed to be. "The email says," and I quote, Joy began, her voice getting stronger and more confident with each word. She had him now. She had him dead to rights, and everyone was about to see it. The studio was completely silent except for Joy's voice. Even the crew members had stopped moving. This was live television at its most dramatic, and everyone could feel it. But as Joy continued reading, something started to feel wrong. The words coming out of her mouth weren't matching what she'd expected to say. The email wasn't saying what she thought it said, and Kash Patel's face wasn't showing embarrassment or guilt. Instead, he looked shocked and worried in a completely different way. Joy kept reading, but a cold feeling was starting to grow in her stomach. Something was very, very wrong. Joy's voice filled the silent studio as she continued reading from the email. But with each word that came out of her mouth, she felt like she was walking deeper into quicksand. This wasn't going the way she'd planned at all. "The operation was compromised from the beginning," she read aloud, "and we need to make sure the American people understand what really happened." Wait. That didn't sound like a cover-up. That sounded like someone trying to expose the truth. Joy's eyes quickly scanned ahead to the next line, trying to understand what she was reading. "The classified documents show clear evidence of illegal surveillance on American citizens without proper warrants or oversight." Joy's stomach dropped. This wasn't the email she thought she had. This wasn't Patel being corrupt. This was Patel trying to expose corruption. She looked up at him across the table and his face had gone pale. "Joy, you need to stop reading that right now," Patel said, his voice urgent but trying to stay calm for the cameras. "That contains sensitive information about ongoing investigations." But Joy was already too deep into it. She'd committed to this moment on live television, and millions of people were watching. She couldn't just stop and say never mind. Her brain was racing, trying to figure out what was happening, but her mouth kept moving. "The surveillance program targeted journalists, political opponents, and even members of Congress," she continued reading. We have evidence that warrants were fabricated and constitutional rights were violated on a massive scale. The studio audience was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Joy's co-hosts were looking at each other with confusion and growing alarm. This wasn't what they'd rehearsed. This wasn't what they'd planned. In the control room, the director was frantically talking into his headset. What is she doing? Is this what we planned? Should we cut to commercial? But the producer, watching the ratings spike in real time, told him to keep rolling. This was television gold, even if nobody understood what was happening. Joy kept reading, and each new sentence made things worse. The email wasn't just about surveillance. It was about active investigations, ongoing operations, people who were working undercover to expose government corruption. Names were mentioned. Locations were given. Methods were described in detail. Joy, please, Patel said again, leaning forward in his chair. You're reading classified information on live television. This could put people in danger. But Joy felt trapped. She'd started this and now she had to finish it. The whole country was watching. She couldn't look weak or unprepared. She was Joy Behar. She didn't back down from anybody. The FBI informant, codenamed Patriot 7, has been feeding us information about the illegal activities, Joy read, her voice getting shakier with each word. His real identity is protected, but he works in the Justice Department and has access to the highest levels of the operation. Kash Patel's face went from pale to white. He stood up from his chair, something that never happened during a live interview. Stop. Stop right now, he said, his voice raised for the first time. You just compromised an active informant on national television. Do you understand what you've done? The audience started murmuring. Some people were pulling out their phones to record what was happening. Others looked scared and confused. This wasn't the kind of entertainment they'd expected from a morning talk show. Joy's co-host finally realized something was seriously wrong. Whoopi reached over and put her hand on Joy's arm. Maybe we should take a quick break, Whoopi suggested. But Joy shrugged her off. She was in full panic mode now, but she couldn't show it. She kept reading even though every instinct was telling her to stop. The email went on to describe specific cases, specific crimes, specific people who were being investigated. It was like a roadmap for criminals to figure out exactly what the government knew about their activities. The money laundering operation runs through 3 different banks, Joy read, her hands now visibly shaking. We've traced over $50 million in illegal transactions, and we're close to identifying the main players. Patel sat back down and put his head in his hands. This is a disaster, he said, loud enough for the microphones to pick up. You've just destroyed years of investigative work. The studio crew was getting nervous. Camera operators were looking at each other, wondering if they should keep filming. The sound engineer had his finger hovering over the mute button. Everyone could feel that something terrible was happening, but nobody knew how to stop it. Joy's brain finally started to catch up with what her mouth was saying. This wasn't the email her research team had found. This was something completely different, but how? How had she gotten the wrong document? She flipped to the second page, hoping things would get better. They didn't. Agent Rodriguez has been working undercover in the cartel for 18 months, she read, and immediately realized she'd just blown the cover of an active federal agent. The blood drained from her face. Even she knew you never ever revealed the identity of undercover agents. That wasn't just bad journalism. That was potentially life-threatening. Patel stood up again, this time looking angry. That's enough. You need to stop reading that immediately. You're going to get people killed. But Joy was frozen. She couldn't stop, but she couldn't continue. The email had 2 more pages, and she had no idea what other secrets she might reveal if she kept going. The audience was getting restless. Some people were standing up, trying to get a better view of what was happening. Others were heading for the exits. This wasn't fun anymore. This felt dangerous. In living rooms across America, people were watching the most bizarre morning television they'd ever seen. Social media was exploding with clips and commentary. News producers at other networks were scrambling to figure out what was happening and whether they should be covering it. Joy looked down at the email in her hands, then up at Kash Patel, then over at her co-hosts. For the first time in her career, she had absolutely no idea what to do next. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever but was probably only 10 seconds. 10 seconds of dead air on live television, with millions of people watching and waiting to see what would happen. Next, finally, Joy found her voice again, but instead of the confident, commanding tone she was known for, it came out small and uncertain. I think there might have been some kind of mistake. And that's when everyone realized that this wasn't just bad television. This was a national security crisis happening in real time. Broadcast live to anyone with a TV or internet connection. The words, "I think there might have been some kind of mistake," hung in the air like a confession at a crime scene. Joy's voice had barely been a whisper, but in the dead silence of the studio, everyone heard it clearly. Kash Patel looked at her, with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "A mistake? Joy, do you understand what you just did? You read classified information on live television. You just exposed active federal agents, ongoing investigations, and sensitive operations." Joy's hands were shaking so badly now that the papers were rustling audibly in the microphones. She looked down at the email again, as if seeing it for the first time. How had this happened? How had she gotten the wrong document? Her mind raced back to 3 days earlier when Tommy had brought her the folder. He'd been so excited, so sure he'd found something big. But now Joy was starting to remember details that hadn't seemed important at the time. Tommy had been working late, rushing to meet a deadline. He'd been pulling documents from multiple sources, trying to piece together a story. "Oh God," Joy whispered. And this time it wasn't into the microphone. She was talking to herself, but everyone could see her lips moving. In the control room, chaos was erupting. The director was screaming into his headset, trying to get guidance from the network executives who were probably in emergency meetings. By now, the legal department was being called. Crisis management teams were being assembled. "Should we cut the feed?" someone yelled. "Are you insane?" the producer shot back. "We're getting the highest ratings in the show's history. Half the country is watching this right now." But even as he said it, he knew they were in serious trouble. This wasn't just bad television anymore. This was a potential national security breach happening live on network TV. Back on the set, Joy's co-hosts were trying to figure out how to help without making things worse. Whoopi had moved her chair closer to Joy, ready to take over if needed. But what could she say? How do you recover from something like this? Joy looked across the table at Patel, and for the first time, she really saw the fear in his eyes. This wasn't about his reputation or his book tour anymore. This was about real people in real danger. "The informant you just named," Patel said quietly. "He has a family. 2 kids. They're probably going to have to go into witness protection. Now because you said his name on television." The weight of that statement hit Joy like a physical blow. She'd spent her entire career going after politicians and public figures, people who had chosen to be in the spotlight. But now she'd put innocent people at risk. A federal agent working undercover, an informant trying to expose corruption, regular people who were just doing their jobs. "I didn't know," Joy said, and her voice cracked. "I thought it was something else. My researcher, he found this email and we thought—" "You thought what?" Patel asked. "You thought you'd ambush me on live television without properly verifying what you had? You thought you'd make good TV by reading classified documents." The audience was getting more uncomfortable by the minute. Some people were still filming with their phones, but others were looking around nervously, like they wanted to leave but didn't know if they were allowed to. This felt dangerous now, like they were witnessing something they shouldn't be seeing. Joy's phone, which was sitting on the table just out of camera view, started buzzing continuously. Text messages, calls, emails. She could see the screen lighting, up over and over again. Her agent, her lawyer, her family, network executives, other journalists. Everyone was trying to reach her. "Joy," Whoopi said gently, "maybe we should take that commercial break now." But Joy shook her head. She was starting to understand the full scope of what had happened, and running away wasn't going to fix it. The damage was already done. The information was already out there, being shared and discussed on social media, being picked up by news outlets around the world. She looked at the remaining pages of the email in her hands. There were still 2 more pages she hadn't read. What other secrets were in there? What other lives could she destroy if she kept going? "Tommy," she said suddenly, remembering her young researcher. "Where's Tommy?" One of the producers in the control room was already trying to find him. Tommy had been scheduled to be in the studio during the interview, but when they called his cell phone, it went straight to voicemail. When they tried his apartment, no one answered. Joy's mind was racing through possibilities. Had Tommy given her the wrong email by accident? Or had someone else been involved? How do you accidentally get classified government documents? And why hadn't anyone caught the mistake during their preparation? She remembered now that the email had seemed a little confusing when she first read it. Some of the language was unclear, some of the references didn't make complete sense, but she'd been so focused on the parts that seemed to support her theory about Patel that she'd ignored the warning signs. "I need to make this right," Joy said, looking directly at Patel. "Tell me how to make this right." Patel shook his head sadly. "Joy, there's no making this right. The information is out there now. You can't unring this bell. The best thing you can do is stop talking and let the professionals handle the damage control." But even as he said it, they both knew it was too late for damage control. Social media was exploding with clips from the show. News websites were posting articles about the classified information that had been revealed. Intelligence agencies were probably scrambling to protect the people whose identities had been compromised. Joy thought about her career, about all the interviews she'd done, all the stories she'd broken. She'd always been proud of her work, proud of holding powerful people accountable. But this wasn't journalism, this was a disaster. The studio lights felt impossibly bright. The cameras felt like they were boring into her soul. The audience felt like a jury watching her realize she'd committed a crime. "How did this happen?" she asked, more to herself than to anyone else. But Patel answered anyway. "This happened because you were so eager to get me that you didn't do your job properly. You didn't verify your source, you didn't check your facts, you didn't consider the consequences of what you were doing." His words stung because they were true. Joy had been so focused on creating a dramatic television moment that she'd forgotten the basic rules of journalism. Check your sources, verify your information, consider the consequences of what you publish. The silence in the studio was deafening. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Would Joy keep reading? Would she apologize? Would the network cut the feed? Joy looked down at the email one more time, then slowly closed the folder. The damage was done, but she wasn't going to make it any worse. The moment Joy closed that folder, everything changed. Not just for her, but for everyone in that studio, everyone watching at home, and people she'd never meet whose lives had just been turned upside down. The show finally cut to commercial, but it was too late. In the age of social media, those 15 minutes of chaos had already been clipped, shared, and spread across the internet faster than wildfire. Classified On Air was trending on Twitter within minutes. TikTok videos were already being made. News outlets around the world were scrambling to figure out what had just happened on American television. Joy sat in her chair during the commercial break, staring at the table in front of her. Her co-hosts were trying to talk to her, but their voices sounded like they were coming from underwater. She couldn't focus on anything except the growing realization of what she'd done. Her phone was buzzing constantly now. She picked it up and saw dozens of missed calls from her agent, her lawyer, network executives, and reporters from other news organizations. There were text messages from friends and family all asking the same thing. What the hell just happened? One text message stood out from the rest. It was from her daughter. "Mom, are you okay? I'm seeing videos of you everywhere." That's when Joy realized this wasn't just about her career anymore. This was about her family, her reputation, her entire life. Her daughter was going to see her mother become a cautionary tale about journalism gone wrong. When the show came back from commercial, Joy wasn't ready. She'd never felt unprepared for live television before, but now she felt completely lost. The producers had decided to end the interview early and move on to other segments, but the damage was already done. Kash Patel had left the studio immediately after the commercial break. He didn't say goodbye, didn't shake hands, didn't do any of the usual pleasantries that happen after an interview. He just gathered his things and walked out, followed by his security team and publicist. As Joy watched him leave, she realized he wasn't angry at her anymore. He looked tired and worried, like someone who knew he was about to spend the next several months dealing with the consequences of someone else's mistake. The rest of the show was a blur. Joy tried to focus on the other segments, but her heart wasn't in it. Her co-hosts carried most of the conversation, and the audience could tell something was wrong. The energy in the studio had completely shifted. When the show finally ended, Joy didn't go to her dressing room like she usually did. Instead, she was escorted to a conference room where a team of network executives, lawyers, and crisis management specialists were waiting for her. "Joy, we need to talk," said the head of legal affairs, a woman Joy had met maybe twice in her entire career. The fact that she was here meant this was serious. For the next 3 hours, Joy sat in that conference room answering questions about how she'd gotten the email, who had access to it, and what her research process had been. The lawyers wanted to know everything, down to the smallest detail. That's when they discovered what had really happened. Tommy, her young researcher, had made a mistake that would haunt both of them forever. He'd been working with a source who claimed to have damaging information about Kash Patel, but somewhere in the process of receiving and organizing the documents, the files had gotten mixed up. The email Joy had read on television wasn't the one Tommy thought he was giving her. It was a classified document that had been leaked separately from a completely different source, and it had accidentally been put in the same folder. When they finally tracked down Tommy, he was at home, too scared to answer his phone. When the network's security team went to his apartment, they found him packing his bags. He knew what had happened, and he knew his career in journalism was over. "I didn't mean for this to happen," Tommy told them, tears streaming down his face. "I was trying to organize everything, and I must have mixed up the files. I never meant to give her classified information, but intentions didn't matter now." The classified information was public. The undercover agent Joy had named was already being relocated for his safety. The informant called Patriot 7 had disappeared, and federal agents were trying to find him before anyone else did. Within 48 hours, Joy was suspended from The View pending an investigation. The FBI opened a criminal investigation into how classified documents had been obtained and broadcast. Congressional committees announced they would be holding hearings about media responsibility and national security. Joy's phone stopped ringing after the third day. Her agent stopped returning her calls. Her publicist dropped her as a client. Suddenly, the woman who had been a fixture on television for decades was radioactive. No one wanted to be associated with her. The media coverage was brutal. Every mistake Joy had ever made was being rehashed. Every controversial statement, every tough interview, every moment of her career was being re-examined through the lens of this one catastrophic error. But the worst part wasn't the media coverage or the legal troubles. It was the human cost that kept growing every day. The undercover agent's family had to leave their home in the middle of the night. The informant's identity was eventually figured out by people on the internet, and he had to go into hiding. 3 ongoing investigations were compromised and had to be shut down. A week after the interview, Joy finally gave her first statement to the press. She stood outside her apartment building surrounded by reporters and cameras, looking tired and defeated. "I want to apologize to everyone who was hurt by my actions," she said, her voice shaking. "I made a terrible mistake, and I take full responsibility for it. I should have been more careful. I should have verified what I was reading. I should have thought about the consequences." She paused, looking directly into the cameras. "I've spent my career trying to hold powerful people accountable, but I failed to hold myself to the same standard. I let my desire to create good television override my responsibility as a journalist." The questions from reporters came fast and harsh. How did she get the classified documents? Was she working with foreign agents? Did she do this on purpose, to hurt national security? Joy answered as best she could, but every answer just led to more questions. The investigation was ongoing. She couldn't talk about certain details. She couldn't explain things that she didn't fully understand herself. 6 months later, Joy reached a plea agreement with federal prosecutors. She pled guilty to mishandling classified information and was sentenced to community service and probation. She was banned from working in television news for 5 years. Tommy was sentenced to 2 years in prison for his role in obtaining and mishandling the classified documents. His journalism career was over before it had really begun. The undercover agent eventually returned to work, but he was never again able to work in the field. The informant was never found, and federal agents assumed he had either fled the country or been killed. Kash Patel, ironically, saw his book sales skyrocket after the incident. The classified information Joy had read actually supported many of the claims he'd been making about government corruption. He became more popular than ever, speaking at conferences and appearing on news shows around the world. Joy now works at a small nonprofit organization, helping teach media literacy to high school students. She tells them about the importance of verifying information, checking sources, and thinking about consequences before acting. Sometimes her students ask her about that day on The View. She always tells them the same thing. One mistake can change everything. In journalism, in life, you have to be careful. You have to think before you act, because once you say something, once you do something, you can never take it back. The interview that was supposed to make Joy's career instead ended it, and somewhere in a government facility, security experts still use footage from that day to train agents about what happens when classified information gets into the wrong hands. It became the cautionary tale that everyone in journalism knows but hopes they'll never live.